Hello, my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, then welcome to my channel, and today's video is going to be my March 2023 reading wrap-up. So I did have a March TBR, and I followed it a little bit. But then I found out about the trans rights readathon, so my TBR kind of flowed nicely into my TBR for that readathon. I will have the original creator of the readathon credited down below in the description, along with some links to some trans rights orgs and resources. I ended up finishing 6 books in the month of March. 2 of them were from my March TBR, 3 of them were from my trans rights readathon TBR, and 1 of them was in both. The content warnings for all of them will be linked down below in the description, along with any spoiler-free reviews or journal with me's that I have for these books. And with that, let's go ahead and get into it. And the first book that I finished in the month of March is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erika Sánchez. This follows our main character whose sister dies in a tragic accident, which leaves her to pick up the pieces of her broken family while also dealing with her own grief, which is only made more difficult by her mother channeling her grief into pointing out every single one of our main characters' imperfections. As her sister was the perfect daughter of the family, however, it is not long before she discovers that there may have been more to her sister's story than that, as she tries to live up to a seemingly impossible situation. This is a story that is definitely structured and formatted in a way that keeps you reading. I had a lot of trouble putting it down once I got into it because I just wanted to know what was going to happen next. And while I did like our main character and I appreciate her voice, she does say things that are pretty off-putting at times. And part of that is just her being young, so I get it, but another part of that did feel separate from that to me. I really enjoyed the friendships in this book and I enjoyed getting to know the characters, but I do feel like there were a few characters and a few aspects of the story that could have used a bit more development. This is a book that did feel very raw and emotional, which is something that I really do appreciate. And I am going to be giving I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter 3.75 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in the month of March is Our Violent Ends by Gong, which is the sequel to These Violent Delights. These Violent Delights is a Romeo and Juliet retelling that is set in 1920s Shanghai. There are rival gangs and a monster, and our main character has to team up with her first love, who is also her first betrayal, and together they have to set aside their guns and their grudges in order to stop all of the mayhem. I love this cast of characters so much, and I love following them throughout this story. I think that they all had really interesting stories, and I was just fully invested and attached the entire way through. There were so many heartwarming and fun moments between them, and also their fair share of angsty moments as well, because of course. I think not only this book, but just the series as a whole utilizes this very well and just utilizes its relationships really well. And that goes for both the friendships, the romances, enemies, and everything in between. This is a story that has so many different moving parts and just so much complexity. And like the first book, you can once again really tell just how much time and research the author put into this story. This is a book that just gave me everything that I ever could have wanted from it, which is something that this series does pretty consistently, if not all the time. And I said this in my review of this book, but this series really does remind me of why I started reading in the first place, and also why I love reading in the first place. And Our Violent Ends made me fall in love with reading all over again, so I definitely gave it 5 stars, and I cannot wait to read the rest of this universe. Next up is Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. This is a book that blends Chinese history with mecha science fiction in a futuristic setting. The boys pilot giant transforming robots to battle the mecha aliens that are outside of the Great Wall, and the girls dream of pairing up with these boys even though they often die from the strain that this puts on their minds. This follows our main character who plans to assassinate the male pilot who is responsible for the death of her sister. However, when her vengeance comes, it gets her labeled as the Iron Widow and also paired with the strongest and most controversial male pilot. She uses this as an opportunity to figure out why the pilot system works in misogynistic ways and to stop more girls from getting sacrificed. Like my full spoiler-free review of this book, I want to get my complaints out of the way first so that I can hype this book without having to worry about those. This is a book that did have some scenes and some lines of dialogue that didn't really work for me. Things just felt a little bit cringy occasionally, and that did take me out of the story some, but not too much. This also did feel very YA YA to me at times, which on one hand, I do think that this story is very refreshing for YA. So this wasn't always a problem, but I don't think that it always meshed well with everything that this book has to offer. This is a story that allows its characters to be messy, to be dark, to be morally gray to a point that is usually pretty brutal and violent. And that is especially the case for our main character. I really felt her anger and her frustrations while reading. This story does have a lot of really terrible people in it, and it does explore misogyny both inside of the pilot system and also outside of it. I also really love the romance. More than I ever thought that I was going to. There are some really good scenes with them in here. And then there are also some really good action scenes in here and some really cool sci-fi elements. And on that note, despite what I said earlier, I did really love the writing style. There were scenes and lines that felt so atmospheric and beautiful, and I thought that this was an incredibly interesting and compelling read all around. I am so excited for the sequel, and I gave Iron Widow 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. Pet takes place in the city of Lucille, where monsters no longer exist, or at least that's what our main character has been taught her whole life, along with the other children in the city. But when a creature emerges from her mother's painting in order to hunt a monster, Jam has to reconsider all that she has ever known regarding monsters and her own city. I read Pet originally for a children's lit class that I had last year, so this was technically a reread for me. And I do honestly think that I enjoyed this more the second time around. And that's not to say that I didn't enjoy this the first time around, because I definitely did. But now it's like I've had those class discussions, I've like written mini papers on it and like had discussion boards and all of that stuff. And I do think that having that experience in the back of my mind really did help me appreciate things about this book that I'm just not so sure that I fully grasped during my first read through. And that first read through was also, you know, a little bit rushed at the time due to other classes. So it probably did also help that I'm out of college now and I don't have to worry about any of that anymore. I thought that Pet was a really interesting read overall. I really appreciated the commentary surrounding monsters and surrounding Lucille, and I especially really appreciated it when it got combined with the censorship commentary. I also really loved our main character Jam's friendship with her best friend Redemption. They have a really sweet dynamic with one another. And I also thought that Jam and Pet had some really good discussions and banter, and there were just a lot of really good and heartwarming relationships just all around. I do think that maybe this could have used a little bit more development in certain areas, which makes me very interested in the prequel, because I do think that that prequel is going to cover most of what I'm talking about here, but I do think that I wanted a little bit more of that in this book specifically, so I'm going to give Pet 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This follows the water-dwelling descendants of African slave women who were thrown overboard by the slave owners. Our main character holds these memories for her people since these memories are too traumatic for them to hold all of the time. This is a role that is very demanding of her, so when it comes time for her to share the memories with them, she flees before it is time for her to take them back. This is another reread for me. I had this book in like the honorable mentions section of my Women's History Month book recommendations video, and I had it in that section because it had been a couple of years since I had last read it, and I thought that it needed a reread before I dove back fully into talking about it. So when I found out about the readathon, I thought that it was a really good sign for me to go ahead and do that reread. Once again, I did end up enjoying this book more than I did the first time that I read it, and although I didn't completely gel with the writing style, I do think that I gelled with it a lot more than I remember gelling with it the first time around, and I ended up growing to really appreciate it. This is a story that really focuses in on our main character, and it's kind of like a deep dive into her, which I really appreciated. And you also get to learn about their history in different pieces. It's a bit of a non-linear narrative in that sense. And I do think that this book maybe could have used some labels or just some sort of signifier when it was time for things to switch over. But I figured it out eventually, and I do think that everything came together really well, and I thought that this was a really interesting read as a whole. I want to say I gave this 4 stars the first time around, but I can't remember if it had any decimals to it. But it definitely does this time, because either way, my new rating is a 4.5, maybe 4.75. I haven't decided yet, and I don't know if I ever will. I've been thinking about my rating for this book a lot recently, and I'm honestly way too conflicted about it to make an official decision. And the final book that I finished in the month of of March is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This follows our main character who has recently moved to New York City. She doesn't really expect much out of her new subway commute, however that all changes when she sees a girl on a train who saves her day when she needs it the most. Our main character's new crush becomes the best part of her day, but then she realizes that this girl has actually been displaced by time, and she is going to have to utilize things that she has left in her past in order to help her. It's been a few years since I've read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. That's honestly probably another book that needs a reread because I forgot how much that I love this author. And this book was an amazing reminder of that. I really don't think I expected for this book to mean as much to me as it ended up meaning to me. I love these characters. They quickly became one of my favorite cast of characters that I've ever read. There were some amazing relationships in here, from romances to friendships and just a ton of found family. And found family is one of, if not my favorite thing to read about, and also just one of my favorite things in general, even outside of books. And there were so many fun little details that really brought these characters and the world itself to life. And just so many fun and heartwarming moments between the characters. Like, I was smiling so much while reading this book. This ended up being such a huge comfort read for me, and I loved getting lost in it. I also really loved the pacing, and I feel like that also helped me, like, just fully throw myself into the story. This book was a romance novel, but with a splash of modern fantasy and mystery. It's also a little bit of a coming-of-age story when it comes to finding your path, and I love the way that that was handled and utilized, and I can't think of anything about this book that I didn't love, honestly. So I gave it 5 stars, and then I went and immediately hauled I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of March. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!